Tina Fordham is a global chief political analyst at Citi. So, Tina, Angel Hurria there comparing Brexit with the Blitz. Is he overdoing the doom and gloom a bit, do you think?
Well, he's certainly using strong language to make an important point, but the headline number in the OECD report was pretty compelling, 40 billion off of GDP. That's an attention getter.
I mean, should we be too bothered about what the OECD says? I mean, after all, let's not forget, it campaigned for the UK to remain in the EU. Angel Hurria was a very outspoken exponent of remaining in the EU.
Well, should we care? I mean, it tells you something about the state of thinking in the sort of the world's leading economies, of which the UK is still one. Before I came on, I read through the Twitter feed for the OECD and looked at some of the comments, and predictably it was a lot of, well, they would say that, wouldn't they, and trying to deprive us of our glorious Brexit. But to a certain extent, when we combine the fact that we've got recent reports about the impact on FDI. We see that inflation continues to go up. One of your commentators in that clip talked about the effect of a weak pound helps some businesses but not others. It starts to be clear in the midst of what is a coordinated, modest global recovery that there is an impact for the UK. And of course, Brexit hasn't actually happened yet.
What's the OECD's forecasting record like? I mean, it's admitted in the past it got a lot of its forecasting wrong during the Eurozone sovereign debt crisis, for example.
Well, I'm a political scientist, and we have our own differences with economists who, famously predict 15 of the last 10 recessions and everything else. But in this post-truth, post-factual world, I'm not sure that it's wise to discount the thinking from these leading forecasters. And again, the UK is slower compared to its other peers, at least in the European Union. There's also something as subtle as the effect on business confidence, which is a bit nearer to what I do in my day job.
Now, the OECD is calling for a second referendum. I mean, this is pretty unrealistic, though, isn't it?
Well, they're not calling for a second referendum. What they've said is if Brexit were to be reversed, there would be a boost to growth. And to my way of thinking, that's classic economist way of not understanding the politics involved. So if Brexit were to sort of just disappear from the scene somehow, if it were to be a do-over or we were to wake up and it'd all be a bad dream, there would be a growth effect, a rebound. The trouble is, and this is what I'm focused on, how exactly would that come about? It's very difficult to imagine a do-over. Go ahead.
Quite. No, I was going to say, I mean, you spent an awful lot of time on the road talking to clients, talking to investors. I mean, what are they telling you about their expectations of Brexit right now? Where are we in the negotiating stage?
Well, I'll tell you one thing. With all of the geopolitical risks in the world, whether it's North Korea or Donald Trump, developments in Iraq potentially impacting energy prices, European political risk, Catalonia, the self-imposed state of Brexit starts to seem like a footnote in a wider panoply of global political risks. So it's a problem for the UK, it's a problem for UK investors and also UK companies. On a trip to Asia, no questions about Brexit.
So it's just not being discussed anywhere else in the world?
It's confusing to the rest of the world. It's confusing, I think, to many of us who are living here trying to tease out the headlines and where things might go. But what I know is that when investors don't understand the political risks, they tend to discount them. And in the case of UK companies, that means they power on with contingency planning because it's hard to understand when a signal might come.
And you mentioned some of the other political risks in the world right now. How do you gauge where America is in terms of its outlook towards free trade right now? I mean, the picture is not terribly
as we're
encouraging.
in the midst of renegotiating NAFTA.
Yeah.
The United States and the UK are both experimenting with reversing decades of globalization. Now, we know globalization has a lot to answer for, and that's something that I addressed in my Vox Populi thesis, over these many years. It's something that that people in the advanced economies increasingly feel they are losers from. But we also know that global trade has lifted tens of millions out of poverty and improved living standards. So improving globalization is something that would seem to be prudent, but it's not exactly just a lever that you can pull.
I guess another analogy between the US and the UK is that there appear to be quite a lot of divisions within the government in both cases.
Yes, some have suggested that the political risks in the advanced economies that I'm increasingly talking about these days are really UK-US problems, that populism in 2016 really materialized in the form of Brexit and Donald Trump. And here in 2017, we've gone through European elections with mainstream parties coming in first place, at least in most cases. One interesting way to think about that, though, is in terms of social spending. Both the UK and US, compared to other OECD countries, speaking of that institution, tend to spend less per capita.
All right, Tina Fordham from Citi. Always good to have you on. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you.